Let's talk politics with our panel of former Liberal MP Fiona Scott and Ben Oquist, former Greens advisor, now Director of DPG Advisory. Ben, let's start with the legal advice. Not really a surprise, but still very critical of the way that the former Prime Minister managed those secret portfolios.
Yeah, it didn't break the law, but broke convention. I thought the most striking thing was the clear advice that how could ministers be kept accountable if you didn't know who they were? And I think this is the big problem for Morrison and the Liberal brand going forward. They're meant to be the Conservative Party that upholds conservative tradition and convention. Yet this legal advice and the inquiry is going to show that they chucked out some of the basic conventions of our liberal democracy. And I mean, that's bad in itself, but it's terribly bad politically for a Conservative Party and its brand. And the inquiry is going to continue to rake over this. That's going to put further pressure on them. There's going to be talk of further pressure in the Parliament, censure motions or references to privileges to committees. And this is going to put the Dutton Liberal Party in a really difficult position. Do they take the side of their former Prime Minister who's sitting by them, or do they back the rest of the Parliament and say more has to be done? And I think in that way there's a lot left to go in this debate politically.
Fiona Scott, let's bring you in now as a former Liberal MP. Are you concerned about where this heads now for Scott Morrison specifically, but for the Liberal Party more broadly?
Yeah, look, Kieran, I could say I'm concerned about Scott Morrison and the Liberal Party, and yes, I am a Liberal and all of those things, but look, my concern is the democracy and the faith the Australian public have in our democracy, and I just hope the due process happens to that. I hope that through the inquiry we also look at all of these special powers and these godlike powers, so we've heard, that was the trigger for this whole action to take place. I hope the inquiry reviews all of these sort of responses and that there is appropriate legislative or regulatory band-aids that are put across this sort of stuff. If there were such concerning powers sitting in the Biosecurity Act, then I want to see that act as well amended and changed. And I think these are the sorts of things that the Australian public do want to see, and they want to know that our democracy is safe. And you know, look, Scott Morrison didn't do anything overly bad in this circumstance, but what if somebody did in the future? And I think it has shown a hole, a gap, and I think we've got to find due process to be able to fix that. I do want to see also that this doesn't just become a political witch hunt. I think, Labor's had their fun. They've had their pound of flesh out of Scott Morrison. Congratulations, you've got your little spike in the news poll. Well done. But, I think now it's time to review everything else and just make sure that we, move forward in a way that is bipartisan or multi-partisan, take the independents on this journey as well, and that we find a mechanism that's appropriate for the Australian people.
Ben Oquist, do you think that there is a risk for Anthony Albanese here? Because Susan Lee earlier in the hour was continually bringing the question on the legal advice back to questions about power prices and what matters to people, and that this is not the issue in the front bar that people are worried about. Is that something that Mr Albanese needs to be cognizant of in a political sense?
Well, I do think any government is wise to ensure that inquiry is not political and independent. We did see some really political inquiries from the former government looking into Labor, as Phil Coorey writes today in the Financial Review, what goes around comes around, in that sense that the Liberals pursued really ridiculous political inquiries into pink bats and the very political inquiry by inter-trade union governance and supposed corruption that really didn't find anything. They're obviously very political. So. And I think the Liberals suffered from those political inquiries. On the other hand, I do think people can walk and chew gum. And the idea that, yes, they're worried about power prices, but they're not worried about democracy and conventions and accountability and a Prime Minister on a power-hungry, power grab and secret appointments to ministries, that they're not concerned about those, is wrong. Our democracy is really important. And yes, be cognizant of where the public is at, what their number one issues are, but we've got to protect our democracy. It's really important. We're seeing it around the world. Finally, I'd say, is that this last election saw integrity issues much further up the political poll than before. And I think that's why I think the independents and the Greens will do well from this issue, because they did well on those integrity issues in the campaign, and so too for Labor now, who's prosecuting the case for a federal ICAC. That legislation is going to be introduced soon, and against this backdrop and scandal facing the former Prime Minister, the opposition is really going to be left with no choice but to back that federal ICAC, I think.
Yeah, it certainly is an interesting climate within which to introduce that legislation, Fiona, which we're expecting before the end of the year.
Yeah, look, I actually agree with everything Ben just said. And I mean, look, I did, campaign with some of my friends who sadly lost their seats to people in the, the Teal movement. And, you'd be mistaken to say that those seats were not won from the Liberal Party off the back of the federal ICAC and, of course, climate change. They were the two issues that were on every single how to vote. They were the things that were handed out by, third-party endorsements. And, I implore even my own party here, you do have to look at what we lost seats for, what was important. And, I think it's important that we are a Liberal Party. We believe in liberty, we believe in freedom, we believe in all of those things. And I think it's important that we step up in this space. This does seem very much, over and above, I guess, the health decision, that it was very much a decision made by Scott Morrison. But the vast majority of the ministers and the Liberal Party itself didn't know this was going on. And I think there's also a responsibility for us as to how we rebuild at the beginning of all of this sort of things, as we acknowledge why we lost the last election and why we lost certain seats, and how we can actually really find that within our core values as what it means to be a Liberal Party. And I think in many ways how we participate through this process, how we are constructive. And, that does cut both ways. And unfortunately, these things are going to be done in a political light, in a political situation, from a new government reviewing an old government with a current sitting, Governor General and all of those sorts of things. But, I mean, look, Kieran, I frankly believe democracy and freedom is more important than those things, and that's why we really do have to sort this out. And while I agree also with what Zoe Daniel just said and Susan Lee, we also have to look at the issues that are really impacting Australians right now. And I just hope the Albanese government can walk and chew gum.
Yeah, and Ben, just finally, only a minute left, the summit next week, really a chance for the government to say it is focusing on those bread and butter issues.
Yeah, and I think it's good. A lot of work's been gone into this summit ahead of time. There's Chris Bowen's hosting a big climate and energy job summit here in Parliament today. There's been one that Tim Ayres has been hosting too. So a lot of debate and discussion even before that summit happens. And I hope it can really supercharge the debate about low wage growth in Australia and what can be done about it and how that's harming the economy overall. There's a big focus during the election campaign. Yes, get the skills right, but let's get people's wages going. And if wages go up, more people are going to want to work and we're going to have a more productive economy too.
Ben Oquist, Fiona Scott, great to see you both. Thanks.